In the heart of a winter storm that could freeze a man's soul, William Wynne thought his fighting days were long over. The 90-year-old Navy SEAL veteran sat by his fireplace, the flickering orange light casting deep shadows across his rugged, sun-kissed skin. His broad shoulders, once carrying the weight of tactical gear in the world's most dangerous zones, now felt the heavy ache of the cold. William ran a hand through his salt and pepper military buzz cut, his deep moss-green eyes reflecting a quiet weariness. Outside, the wind howled through the Montana pines like a wounded beast, but it wasn't the wind that caught his attention. It was a faint, rhythmic scratching at his heavy oak door. William stood up, his tall, muscular frame moving with a grace that decades of service hadn't erased. He adjusted his short, silver-streaked box beard, his square jaw tightening. Most people would have ignored a noise in a blizzard this fierce, but a SEAL's instincts never truly sleep. He checked the perimeter through the window, seeing nothing but a wall of white. But the scratching continued, desperate, persistent, and strangely rhythmic. When he finally pulled the door open, the sub-zero air rushed in, and there, shivering in the snow, was a creature that looked more like a ghost than a dog. It was a cross between a German Shepherd and a Labrador, its black and tan fur matted with ice. The dog didn't bark, it simply looked up Verkeptehat intelligent dark brown eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. William stared at the dog. Despite being clearly starved and exhausted, the animal maintained a perfectly upright posture, its erect pointed ears twitching toward the darkness of the woods. This wasn't just a stray, this was a professional. William reached out, his powerful, calloused hand hovering near the dog's long muzzle. The dog, whom we would come to know as Smoky, didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into the warmth of the house, a low whimper escaping its throat. William stepped aside, gesturing for the Bami-kilo-gam animal to enter. As Smoky limped into the light, William noticed something that made his blood run cold, a torn tactical nylon collar with a broken leash attachment. This dog had been working. Before we delve deeper into how this mysterious K9 ended up at William S. doorstep, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible stories of loyalty and bravery to life. William knelt beside Smoky, his forehead wrinkles deepening as he inspected the dog. There were no wounds, but Smoky was trembling from more than just the cold. He kept looking back at the door, his intelligent eyes scanning the shadows outside as if he expected something or someone to follow him in from the freezing abyss. William moved to the kitchen, his movements efficient and quiet. He prepared a bowl of warm broth and some dried meat, placing it gently in front of the visitor. Smoky hesitated, his training momentarily warring with his starvation. Only when William gave a soft, affirming nod did the dog begin to eat. As Smoky ate, William observed him with the analytical eye of an operator. The dog's build was lean and powerful, built for endurance and speed. The way he kept his ears pinned toward the rear of the house told William everything he needed to know. This dog was on the clock, even now. "Who were you looking for, buddy?" William whispered, his voice a low rumble. Smoky stopped eating and looked up, his dark brown eyes locking onto William's moss-green ones. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them. William saw the grief in the dog's expression. He had seen that same look in the eyes of his teammates when they lost a brother in arms. Smoky wasn't just hungry for food, he was looking for help. He was a K9 who had lost his partner, and he had chosen William S. House for a reason. The SEAL veteran felt a familiar spark of adrenaline. He realized the dog hadn't come to him for rescue, Smoky had come to recruit him for a mission. As the night deepened, the blizzard outside intensified, turning the world into a chaotic swirl of ice. William sat on his porch bench inside the mudroom, cleaning his tactical flashlight. Smoky sat perfectly still beside him, his black and tan fur now dry and sleek. Suddenly the dog's demeanor shifted, his long muzzle lifted, sniffing the air, and a low vibrating growl started deep in his chest. His erect ears rotated toward the north side of the property. William froze. He didn't hear anything over the wind, but he trusted the K9's senses over his own. William stood up, his muscular frame casting a long shadow against the wall. He reached for a heavy thermal jacket, his square jaw set in a hard line. He knew that in this remote area visitors were rare, and visitors in a level 5 blizzard were unheard of unless they were looking for trouble. Smoky moved to the door, his posture tense and ready to spring. The dog wasn't acting like a pet, he was acting like a lead scout. William realized that whatever Smoky had been tracking, the deadly suspect mentioned in the local radio alerts about a fugitive, was no longer miles away. The threat was on his land, using the cover of the storm to approach the only house for 10 miles. William dimmed the lights in the house, plunging the interior into a tactical twilight. He didn't need a weapon to feel dangerous. His mind was his greatest tool. He watched Smoky, who was now pressed against the floor, watching the bottom gap of the front door. The dog's intelligence was staggering. He wasn't barking to give away their position. He was waiting for William's lead. William looked out the reinforced glass. Through the swirling snow he saw it, a momentary flash of a different kind of light. Tactical red lens used by professionals to maintain night vision. The veteran's heart rate didn't speed up. It slowed down, entering the blue zone of combat focus. Someone was out there, someone who knew how to move in the dark, someone who had likely been the cause of Smoky's partner's disappearance. William realized that Smoky hadn't just been asking for food, he had been leading the enemy into a trap. Together, the seal and the K9 were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. William leaned down and whispered to the dog, "Stay low, Smoky. Let's show them why they picked the wrong house." Smoky let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh of relief, his dark eyes glowing with a renewed, fierce purpose. William moved to his gear locker, his tall, muscular frame moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 missions. He didn't reach for a rifle. He reached for his tactical vest, a high-lumen strobe light and a heavy-duty climbing rope. His broad shoulders filled the vest perfectly, a testament to a lifetime of physical discipline. Smoky watched every move, his erect ears following the clink of the metal carabiners. William looked at the dog, noting his perfectly upright posture even in the dim light. "We aren't going to play his game, Smoky," William muttered, his square jaw tightening. "We're going to play mine." He grabbed a pair of thermal goggles, the moss green of his eyes momentarily hidden behind the high-tech lenses. He checked his reflection in the dark window. His salt and pepper military buzz cut and silver-streaked boxed beard gave him the appearance of an old grey wolf, seasoned and dangerous. He knew the suspect outside was likely younger, perhaps faster, but William had the home field advantage and a partner with the best nose in the state. Smoky stood by the mudroom door, his long muzzle pointing toward the north woods. The dog wasn't just a pet, he was a living radar system. William felt a surge of respect for the animal. Together they were a complete unit. William cracked the back door just enough for them to slip out into the blinding white. The wind tried to tear the door from his hand, but his powerful grip held firm. They stepped onto the porch, the sub-zero air hitting William's rugged skin like 1,000 needles. Smoky didn't hesitate. The Barmakilogam dog stepped into the deep snow, his black and tan fur providing a stark contrast against the white. He moved with a specialized gait, keeping his weight distributed, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning the tree line. William followed, staying low, his deep forehead wrinkles visible even under the hood of his parka. They moved in a flanking maneuver, circling away from where he had seen the red light. The plan was simple: get behind the intruder and use the storm as a cloak. The snow was falling so hard it was impossible to see more than 5 feet ahead, but Smoky didn't need to see. He had the scent. The dog stopped every few yards, lifting his long, strong muzzle to taste the air. He was tracking a specific scent, the scent of the man who had wronged his partner. William watched the dog's tail. It was held stiff, a clear signal that the target was close. Through the thermal goggles, the world turned into a landscape of cold blues and greys. Suddenly, a heat signature bloomed near the old equipment shed, a bright, pulsating orange shape. The intruder was hunkered down, likely trying to regain feeling in his fingers. William signaled Smoky Vekepite heart a closed fist, the universal silent command to halt. The dog froze mid-step, his upright posture held steady despite the wind. William's moss-green eyes narrowed. The suspect was dressed in high-end tactical gear, but he was shivering. He wasn't prepared for a Montana blizzard. He was a city-bred professional out of his element. William realized the man was holding an encrypted radio, trying to call for an extraction that would never come in this weather. Smoky let out the faintest of exhales, a tiny cloud of steam rising from his long muzzle. The dog's dark brown eyes were fixed on the heat signature with an intensity that was almost frightening. This was the moment of truth. William didn't want a shootout. He wanted to neutralize the threat and get answers. He began to uncoil the climbing rope, his large, calloused hands working at expert precision despite the numbing cold. He was going to use the intruder's own disorientation against him. William signaled Smoky to move to the left while he moved to the right. It was a classic pincer movement. Smoky understood immediately, creeping through the underbrush with the silence of a shadow. William reached into his vest and pulled out a small, programmable sound device. He threw it toward the far side of the shed. A second later, the sound of a heavy branch snapping echoed through the clearing, amplified by the shed's metal walls. The intruder spun around, his red-lensed flashlight cutting through the snow toward the north. While the suspect was distracted, William closed the distance. His boots made no sound in the soft powder. He was within 10 feet when the intruder realized he'd been tricked. The man turned back, but it was too late. Smoky emerged from the whiteout on his left, a low, terrifying rumble in his chest that wasn't a bark, but a promise of action. The suspect froze, caught between a 9-year-old Navy SEAL veteran, hut shoulders like a mountain and a K9 that looked ready to reclaim justice. The man's eyes went wide, reflecting the sheer terror of being hunted by professionals. The intruder dropped his radio, his hands trembling as he raised them in a gesture of surrender. He knew he couldn't outrun the dog in this snow, and he certainly couldn't outfight the man standing before him. William stood tall, his square jaw set, the salt and pepper hair of his beard dusted with frost. He looked like an ancient guardian of the mountain. Smoky sat back on his haunches, never taking his intelligent eyes off the suspect's throat. The tension in the air was thicker than the falling snow. The bond between a veteran and a K9 is unbreakable, and Smoky is proving that today. If you're enjoying this story of loyalty and tactical skill, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us tell more stories of these incredible heroes. William stepped forward, his moss-green eyes burning with a cold fire. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. He simply pointed toward the house. The suspect nodded frantically, his ego completely shattered by the efficiency of the SEAL and his K9 partner. As they began the trek back to the cabin to wait for the authorities, William placed a hand on Smoky's head. The dog leaned into the touch for just a second before returning to his professional upright posture. The hunt was over, but the story of why this man was here was just beginning. The walk back to the cabin was a slow, grueling march through waist-deep drifts. William kept a firm grip on the rope he had used to bind the suspect's wrists, loosely enough to prevent injury, but securely enough to ensure control. The suspect, a man in his late 30s with sharp, calculating eyes that were now wide with terror, stumbled frequently. Every time he faltered, Smoky was there, his balmy kilo gam frame acting like a living barrier, nudging the man back onto the path. Smoky moved with a dignified, upright posture that commanded respect even in the middle of a blizzard. William's broad shoulders shielded the wind for the group, his moss-green eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of backup. He knew that professional suspects rarely worked alone, but the storm was so severe that any reinforcements would be grounded. His deep forehead wrinkles were etched with focus. He looked at Smoky, whose black and tan fur was now matted at fresh snow. The dog's long, strong muzzle was pointed straight ahead, but his ears were constantly rotating, listening for the slightest deviation in the wind. The veteran and the K9 were a synchronized team, moving with a rhythm that only comes from years of high-stakes environments. Once back inside the warmth of the cabin, the atmosphere changed from the chaos of the storm to the heavy silence of a tactical debrief. William led the suspect to a heavy wooden chair in the center of the room. He didn't use force, his mere presence, his tall, muscular build and square-jawed Caucasian face, was enough to keep the man compliant. William sat Smoky down by the fireplace. The dog immediately took up a watch position, his intelligent dark brown eyes never leaving the intruder. Smoky looked less like a stray now and more like the professional protector he was born to be. William took off his thermal jacket, revealing a simple tactical shirt that emphasized his powerful jawline and rugged skin texture. He began to search the suspect's outer pockets with efficient, practiced movement. He found no weapons. The man had likely ditched them in the snow to appear less threatening if caught. But he did find an encrypted satellite phone and a laminated photograph. William's moss-green eyes darkened as he looked at the photo. It showed Smoky standing beside a young officer in a K9 unit uniform. The officer was smiling, his arm around the dog. It was the confirmation William needed. This wasn't just a suspect. This was the man Smoky had been hunting for justice. William leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He didn't yell, he did not even raise his voice. He simply watched the man. This was the interrogation phase, a skill William had perfected in the Navy SEALs. He knew that silence was often more terrifying than threats. The flickering firelight danced across William S. Salt and Pepper military buzz cut and highlighted the deep crow's feet around his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen everything and could be lied to. "Smoky told me a lot about you," William said finally, his voice a low, resonant rumble. The suspect looked at the dog, then back at William. "The dog can't talk," the man hissed, though his voice lacked conviction. William smiled thinly, the silver streaks in his short boxed beard catching the light. "He does to have to. A dog like this, a mix of shepherd and lab intelligence, speaks through his actions. He found me because he knew more to see what he saw." Smoky let out a soft huff as if agreeing with the assessment. The suspect shifted uncomfortably, realizing he wasn't just facing a veteran. He was facing a man who understood the language of loyalty. The wind outside suddenly roared with renewed fury, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. The power flickered and then died, plunging the room into a deep orange glow provided only by the dying embers of the fire. In the shadows, William S. moss-green eyes seemed to glow with a Predator-S intensity. The suspect saw this as an opportunity. He began to slowly work his hands against the rope, thinking the darkness would hide his movements, but he forgot about the other professional in the room. Smoky stood up instantly. He didn't growl, but the way he moved, his perfectly upright posture and the way his long muzzle hovered just inches from the suspect's knee, was a clear warning. William didn't even move from his spot. "I would do that if Mott were you," William said calmly. "Smoky has a very high standard for conduct in this house." The suspect froze, his heart pounding so hard William could almost hear it. The veteran walked over and placed a fresh log on the fire, the sparks illuminating his rugged skin and the determined set of his square jaw. He was in total control, power or no power. Seeing that he couldn't escape or outsmart the duo, the suspect tried a different tactic: bribery. "Look, Wynne, that's your name, right? More know who you are. You're a retired hero living in the middle of nowhere. You probably don't have much. There fess a digital wallet on that phone, 10,000. 20,000. Just let me walk out into the storm. Mort Leglunk take my chances." William looked at the man, his expression unreadable. He looked at Smoky, who was watching William, waiting for his lead. William walked over to Smoky and knelt down, his large hand resting gently on the dog's tan and black fur. "You hear that, Smoky? He thinks my loyalty has a price tag." William looked back at the suspect, his moss-green eyes cold and sharp. "You made one mistake. You thought Smoky came to me because Mott was a retired hero. He came to me because he knew Mott honor the badge his partner wore. You can tell by the kind of bond we have." Smoky leaned his head against William S.'s shoulder for a brief moment, a rare show of affection that signaled the ultimate pact between the veteran and the K9. They would wait for the law together. The hours between midnight and dawn are always the hardest, even for a seasoned Navy SEAL. William Wynne sat in a high-backed wooden chair, his tall, muscular frame relaxed but ready like a coiled spring. His deep moss-green eyes remained fixed on the suspect, reflecting the glowing embers of the hearth. Despite the exhaustion that would have broken a lesser man, William S. discipline was absolute. He ran a hand over his salt and pepper military Bayou date cut, the rough texture of his skin a reminder of years spent in harsher climates than this. Across the room, Smoky was the picture of canine perfection. The Bamaki Logam dog remained in a perfectly upright posture, his black and tan fur shimmering in the dim light. He hadn't slept. His intelligent dark brown eyes were locked on the intruder with a steady, unblinking gaze. Every time the suspect shifted or sighed, Smoky's erect, pointed ears would twitch and his long, strong muzzle would lift slightly as if tasting the man's fear. William watched the bond between them grow in the silence. It was a silent pact of protection. The veteran knew that Smoky was just guarding a prisoner. He was guarding the only man who had offered him a hand when the world had turned cold. To pass the time and keep the suspect from thinking he could manipulate the situation, William began to speak. His voice was a low, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small cabin. He talked about his time in the teams, about the importance of a swim buddy, and how loyalty was the only currency that mattered in the dark. As he spoke, the firelight highlighted the deep crow's feet around his eyes and the powerful jawline framed by his black and silver boxed beard. He looked every bit the warrior he was, even in retirement. The suspect tried to interrupt, offering excuses about being forced into his crimes, but William simply looked at him with those piercing moss-green eyes. "Save it," William said softly. "Morph's seen men like you on 3 different continents. You all have the same story, and none of it matters when you standing in front of a dog who knows the truth." Smoky let out a low, vibrating huff, almost as if he were confirming William's words. The suspect went quiet, realizing that he was just being held by a man and a dog. He was being judged by 2 souls who shared a code he could never understand. As the first hint of grey light began to bleed through the frosted windows, Smoky suddenly stood up and walked toward the suspect's discarded tactical jacket. William watched closely, his forehead wrinkles deepening in curiosity. Smoky didn't tear at the fabric. Instead, he used his long, strong muzzle to delicately nudge a hidden seam in the lining. The dog looked back at William, his dark brown eyes filled with an urgent intelligence. William stood, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the suspect as he approached the jacket. With the precision of an operator, William felt along the seams Smoky had indicated. There, tucked away in a micro-pocket, was a small, encrypted flash drive. The suspect's face went pale, his square jaw dropping in shock. He hadn't expected the dog to be trained for scent detection of specific electronic components. "This is Vakep Hartate his partner died for, is it?" William asked, his voice cold. He held the drive up, the silver streaks in his beard catching the morning light. Smoky let out a sharp single bark, the first sound he had made all night. It was a sound of triumph. The evidence was safe, and the sacrifice of Smoky's human partner would not be in vain. Outside, the ferocious howling of the wind finally began to subside, replaced by a heavy, eerie silence. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world buried in 5 feet of pristine, deadly white powder. William looked out the window, his rugged skin appearing even more weathered in the harsh morning light. He knew the authorities would be trying to reach them soon, but the roads would be impassable for hours. He looked at Smoky, who was now sitting by the door, his posture still perfectly upright, his ears alert. William began to prepare a basic breakfast. Moving with the efficient grace of a man used to operating in isolation, he gave Smoky a final portion of the dried meat, watching as the dog ate with a quiet dignity. "We almost there, Smoky," William whispered. He felt a strange sense of melancholy. Soon the cabin would be filled with police and investigators, and the quiet bond he had formed with this K9 over a night of peril would be tested by the return of the real world. He adjusted his tactical vest, his muscular frame ready for the final phase of the mission, the handoff. Through the still, cold air, a distant sound began to grow, the rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack of a heavy-duty helicopter. William's moss-green eyes sharpened. He stepped onto the porch, Smoky trailing closely at his side. The Bamaki Gam dog looked like a statue of black and tan marble against the snow. William looked down at the dog, noting how Smoky's intelligent eyes were scanning the horizon, identifying the aircraft long before a normal dog would. The helicopter, marked with state police insignias, banked over the tree line, its skids kicking up a cloud of loose snow. William raised a single hand in a calm signal, his tall figure a beacon of stability in the frozen wasteland. He felt a deep sense of pride, not for his own actions but for the starving stray who had had the courage to ask for help. Smoky leaned against William's leg, his erect ears forward. They had survived the storm, they had captured the suspect, and they had secured the evidence. As the rotors began to slow, William knew that while the mission was ending, his life with Smoky was likely just beginning. As the helicopter's skids touched down on a cleared patch of granite near the cabin, the snow-muffled silence was replaced by the roar of engines. 2 officers in tactical winter gear jumped out, their movements hurried. William stood his ground, his tall, muscular frame unmoved by the rotor wash. His moss-green eyes narrowed against the flying ice, but his expression remained calm. He looked every bit the seasoned veteran, a man who had seen hundreds of Etuzeha extractions in much hotter zones. Beside him, Smoky remained a statue of discipline. The Bamaki K9 didn't flinch at the noise. He stood in his perfectly upright posture, his black and tan fur rippling in the wind. The officers approached with caution, their hands near their holsters until they saw William's face. "Commander Wynne," one called out, using William's old rank. William nodded, his square jaw set firm. He didn't need to say much. He gestured toward the cabin where the suspect sat bound. The officers looked from the veteran to the dog, their eyes widening in recognition. "That's Smoky," the younger officer whispered, his voice full of awe. "We thought he was lost in the blizzard after the ambush." William felt a tightening in his chest. He looked down at Smoky, whose intelligent dark brown eyes were now fixed on the officers, though he didn't move from William's side. William led the officers inside, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. The suspect, seeing the state police, seemed to deflate, his hope for a bribe or an escape vanishing instantly. As the officers took custody of the man, William reached into his pocket and produced the encrypted flash drive Smoky had found. "Your suspect was hiding this," William said, his voice a low rumble. "Smoky found it. It seems to be the reason for everything that happened." The lead officer took the drive as if it were made of gold. "This is the evidence we needed to dismantle the entire syndicate, sir. Smoky's partner, he gave everything to get this." The room grew heavy with the mention of the fallen officer. William's moss-green eyes softened as he looked at Smoky. The dog had walked over to the younger officer, sniffing his uniform before returning to sit exactly beside William's left leg. The bond that had formed over a single night of survival was palpable. The veteran's rugged skin and deep forehead wrinkles seemed to age him in that moment, reflecting the shared grief of two warriors who had lost comrades in the line of duty. The suspect was led out into the cold, a shadow of the man who had tried to intimidate them just hours before. While the officers processed the scene, the younger officer, Sergeant Miller, stayed behind to talk to William. "Smoky isn't just any K9 commander," Miller explained, looking at the dog with profound respect. "He's a crossbreed specifically trained for deep cover tracking. His partner, Officer Dave Halloway, was a close friend of mine. When they were ambushed 3 days ago, Dave's last act was to release Smoky's tactical harness so he could escape. We thought the suspect had killed the dog too." William ran a hand over his salt and pepper military buzz cut, absorbing the weight of the story. The description of the ambush was grim, but William focused on Smoky's resilience. The dog had survived 3 days in a Montana blizzard, starving and alone, yet he hadn't forgotten his mission. He had tracked the killer to the only place where he could find a force multiplier, another warrior. William looked at his own calloused hands, then at Smoky's long, strong muzzle. "He didn't just escape," William muttered, his powerful jawline tightening. "He hunted, he brought the fight to him." Smoky let out a soft whine, his intelligent, dark brown eyes searching William's face as if he understood every word of the eulogy. As the helicopter prepared for a second trip to transport the evidence and the primary team, Sergeant Miller looked at William with a hesitant expression. "Commander, the department, they'll want Smoky back at the K9 facility. He's technically state property and he is one of our most decorated assets." William felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter air. He looked down at the dog. Smoky's erect ears were pinned back slightly, and he had moved even closer to William, his black and tan fur pressing against the veteran's leg. William knew the rules. He knew about property and assets, but he also knew about souls. He looked at the sergeant, his moss-green eyes turning hard and sharp. "Look at him, Sergeant," William said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "He's spent 3 days in hell. He didn't go back to the station. He came here. He's not an asset anymore. He's a survivor who's found his peace." The sergeant looked at Smoky, then at the formidable man standing guard over him. The officer saw the silver streaks in William's boxed beard and the deep crow's feet around his eyes, the marks of a man who didn't take loyalty lightly. He knew that taking the dog by force would be a mistake he didn't want to make. The sergeant sighed, a cloud of breath escaping into the cabin's chilled air. The department usually retires K9s after they lose a partner, especially after a trauma like this. Usually they go to a kennel or a high-stress adoption program. He paused, looking at the way Smoky looked up at William with total unyielding trust. "But looking at the two of you, Mott can write a report stating that Smoky is unfit for further service due to psychological trauma, provided he has a permanent, qualified handler to oversee his retirement." William didn't hesitate. He didn't need to check his bank account or his schedule. "He stays," William said, the 2 words carrying the weight of a blood oath. The sergeant nodded, a small smile breaking through his professional mask. "Mort LeGlunk handle the paperwork, Commander. Mort think Dave would have wanted it this way." As the officers finally departed and the sound of the helicopter faded into the distance, the cabin returned to its natural silence. William sat back down by the fire, his muscular frame finally relaxing. Smoky didn't go back to the door. Instead, the Bamiki Logam dog circled twice and laid his head directly on William's boot. The veteran reached down, his rugged hand stroking the dog's tan ears. The mission was finally truly over. The departure of the helicopter left a vacuum of silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. William Wynne stood on the porch, his tall, muscular frame silhouetted against the blinding white of the fresh Montana snow. He took a deep breath of the crisp, frigid air, feeling the tension finally leave his broad shoulders. Behind him, the cabin was empty of intruders and police, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. He looked down at Smoky, who was sitting patiently at his side. The Bay-McKillig dog's black and tan fur was now clean and dry, and his intelligent dark brown eyes were no longer scanning for threats, but looking up at William with a quiet, soulful curiosity. William walked back inside, his boots echoing on the hardwood. He reached for a heavy wool blanket and draped it over the sofa before sitting down. For the first time in years, the veteran didn't feel the need to check the locks thrice or keep a light on in every room. His square jaw relaxed, and the deep forehead wrinkles that usually spoke of constant vigilance seemed to soften. Smoky hopped up onto the sofa, a privilege William had never allowed any other animal, and curled up against the veteran's leg. The stray wasn't a stranger anymore. He was a brother-in-arms who had found his way home. Over the next few days, the bond between the two warriors deepened in the quietude of the mountains. William found himself talking to Smoky more than he had talked to anyone in a decade. He spoke of the missions that still haunted his moss-green eyes and the teammates he had lost. Smoky listened with a profound intensity, his erect, pointed ears twitching at the sound of William's low rumble. The dog seemed to understand the weight of the veteran's words. It was a mutual healing. William provided the safety and food Smoky had been starving for, and Smoky provided the purpose William had been missing since his retirement. William noticed that Smoky's training never truly left him. Even when they were relaxing, the dog maintained a perfectly upright posture when alert, and his long, strong muzzle was always sniffing the wind for changes. William's rugged skin, weathered by sun and salt, felt a little less tight as he spent his afternoons grooming Smoky's coat. The silver streaks in William's boxed beard seemed to catch the light differently now, not as signs of age but as symbols of a life lived with honor. They were two old soldiers finding peace in the aftermath of a war that the rest of the world had forgotten. A week after the blizzard, a local ranger made the trek up to William's cabin to deliver a package. Inside was a letter from the widow of Officer Dave Halloway, Smoky's former partner. William sat at his heavy oak table, his large calloused hands carefully unfolding the paper. The letter thanked William for his courage and expressed a deep relief that Smoky had found a legendary seal to look after him. Included was a small photo of Smoky as a puppy, already showing that intelligent dark brown gaze. The letter also confirmed that the flash drive Smoky had recovered contained the evidence needed to bring down a massive criminal network responsible for the deaths of several officers. William looked at the drive, then at Smoky, who was watching him from the rug. "You did it, buddy," William whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You finished the job." He realized then that Smoky hadn't come to him just for food. He had come to ensure justice was served. The veteran felt a surge of pride for the K9 that was stronger than any medal he had ever been awarded during his own service. As spring began to peek through the melting Montana ice, William and Smoky became a familiar sight in the high country. William, with his military buzz cut and powerful build, moved through the trails with a renewed vigor. Beside him, Smoky was a blur of black and tan energy, his balmy kilogam frame lean and muscular from their daily treks. They were no longer the veteran and the stray, they were a unit. William had replaced his tactical vest with a simple hiking pack, but his moss-green eyes were as sharp as ever, always keeping an eye on his partner. The suspect they had captured was now facing a lifetime behind bars, but that wasn't what William thought about during their long walks. He thought about the day the starving K9 had scratched at his door in the middle of a blizzard. He thought about how close he had come to ignoring that sound. He looked at Smoky's perfectly upright posture as the dog stood on a rocky outcrop, surveying the valley below. The dog looked like a king. William realized that Smoky hadn't been a stray at all. He had been a messenger of destiny, sent to remind an old seal that his most important mission was still ahead of him, the mission of companionship. The story of the SEAL veteran and the K9 who tracked a deadly suspect became a legend in the small mountain community, but for William Wynne it was simply the beginning of a new chapter. As the sun set over the jagged peaks, casting a golden glow on his rugged, sun-kissed skin, William sat on his porch with Smoky at his feet. The deep crow's feet around his moss-green eyes crinkled into a genuine smile as he watched Smoky chase a stray leaf across the clearing. The intelligent dark brown eyes of the dog eventually met William S., and for a long moment nothing needed to be said. Loyalty isn't just a word, it's an action taken when the world is at its coldest. Smoky had asked for food, but he had given William his soul. As the first stars began to twinkle in the vast Montana sky, the veteran and the dog stood together, two protectors, two survivors, and two friends. The stray star had finally found its place in the universe, and the old warrior had found his peace. Together, they were ready for whatever the next storm might bring, knowing that as long as they had each other, they would never truly be alone again.
The Channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.